And we're back for an episode of Look at that intro. That was nice. Welcome back for another episode of Black Life Amplified. It's the virtual town hall series hosted by the African American Leadership Forum. My name is Brittany L. Wright with Insight News. And before we get started, I want to give a very special thanks to our sponsors, which include the Minneapolis Foundation, Northpoint Health and Wellness, and Children's Minnesota for making this town hall possible. I also want to give a very special thank you to our community partners, which include Northpoint Health and Wellness, Children's Minnesota, Insight News, Gray Matter, the Minnesota Spokesman-Recorder, and Minnesota Community Care. Now, if you didn't get a chance to watch our special episode from 2 weeks ago, I highly encourage you to check it out. We had 2 episodes that week, and the one on Friday was about the recent events that took place in our state, everything from COVID to Dante Wright and the Chauvin trial and how we heal our way through it. So you can view the full conversation on the African American Leadership Forum Facebook page or YouTube channel. Now, today's episode of Black Life Amplified is a celebration and an acknowledgement of this show right here. So Black Life Amplified is officially 1 year old, and we're here today talking about the past year and the importance of community collaboration. So on today's panel, I am joined by Marcus Owens, who is the Executive Director of the African American Leadership Forum, James Burroughs, who is the Vice President and Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer at Children's Minnesota, Reuben Moore, who is the President and Executive Officer at Minnesota Community Care, and Ms. Stella Whitney-West, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Northpoint Health and Wellness. So welcome, panelists, to the show. Thank you for being here.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Glad to have you here. So first, we're going to talk about this town hall and how we even got here. I was not here at the start of this collaboration, so I need you all's help in really telling the story of how this collaboration came to be. I know that it was around March 2020. The pandemic was happening. We were all quarantined in our homes. Some data had come out that Black people were disproportionately impacted by this virus, and our community leaders decided to do something about it. But I don't know who and how. So who's going to take the lead on telling the story on how we got here?
So I'll take the lead, Brittany, and I'm going to start off with the Black Life Amplified motto in our community. What had happened was.
Right.
Some of it may be true, some of it may be made up, but what I recall is Batala McFarland of Insight News and Al gave me a call because Batala and I were talking about how do we get the word out to our community that this COVID-19 virus is very serious and that is something we need to address in our community, but it needs to be a collective discussion around it. And she had mentioned to me partnering with Northpoint, I believe, and also Minnesota Community Cares, and one of the children was involved. And I said, yes, we're in. I suggested to her, and also she suggested to me as well, that how do we get ALF involved? And I said, well, maybe you should just go ahead and call Marcus and say how we can collaboratively do it together. And I love it because it came together with Insight, Spokesman, which people think are competitors, but we're not. We're trying to get Black news to everyone. And also you, Brittany, get involved later as well with your organization, Gray Matters, as well, your ability to do some great hosting, that we all came together to address that. So that's how I think it happened. And then Marcus may have a perspective as well.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it right on the head, JB. I recall that conversation with Batala early on, and, our team in the forum was trying to figure out, well, how do we transition from bringing our community together and convening in forums that we were doing monthly called Monthly Connect. And we're like, well, we can't do anything, in person. So it's probably time to think about something digital. So it was perfect timing to have this conversation because we're like, we've got to do something. There's a lot of myths and a lot of misinformation happening in our community around COVID. So we're like, this is the perfect partnership, perfect opportunity to partner and collaborate with, our health organizations and our health leaders, as well as our Black media, to really bring something to life to our community so that we can bring facts. and good information from the experts versus it coming from, everyone with an opinion. So that was, to me, how it really started. And, I think it's just been a wonderful year to just, bring this information to the community.
Definitely. Well, let me ask Ms. Stella, why did you say yes to this collaboration when you got the call?
Oh, I had to. I mean, and I will just co-sign on what James and Marcus have said. They got it mostly right. I think that the reason I said yes is that we are all organizations, and full disclosure, I'm also on the board for ALF. But it takes all of us to collectively come together with all of our resources in order to reach our community, in order to make sure that our community has the information and the resources that they need in order that they are healthy and that our community thrives. So this was a great opportunity, and I think even more important, to talk about how this town hall has grown and the importance that it has in the community now. So we had, there's always someone that has an idea and a seed, and Batala is good for that, as well as Al McFarland, and these are great partners.
Agreed. Reuben, how about you? Why did you say yes to this collaboration?
It's so interesting because I remember emailing the Marcus like, we need to do something. They responded like, we were just right. It was a point of synergy where you found that we had a bunch of folks who are like-minded, who wanted to impact the community in a positive way to ensure that the narrative in the community around COVID-19, around the civil discourse that was happening was appropriately articulated by Black folks. And so we were just on the same page. And so we just kind of went and just flew. And I think one of the things that for me that stood out about the leaders on the call is that we had a point of humility, and we show up in a way that's so focused and so committed to the community that it was no ego involved, not one instance. It was no status involved. It was all about how we ensure that our community is well informed during this really tough period.
That's so important to talk about, just being willing to come to the table and to leave your ego aside and to do something that's good for the community, right? And we're going to continue to talk about that through this conversation. I'll say for me, the reason why I said yes is the pandemic happened. We're quarantined in our house, and I am suddenly watching Trevor Noah, Angela Rye, all of my favorite people in media doing broadcasts from home. At the time I was a stay-at-home mom. I was just coming off of my maternity leave, and I thought, I would love to be able to get back into television, but to do it from my house since I still have a small baby. And I ended up doing a few interviews with Insight News. And typically I was writing for them, and that was how I was showing up in that space. But they had started asking me, well, will you interview someone on camera? You have equipment? Will you do an on-camera interview? And when Harry ended up transitioning out, who was the first host of the show back when it was called We Good, the virtual town hall series, I said yes, because it was absolutely in alignment with what I wanted to do. And I absolutely believe in Black people talking about their health and their wellness, and us celebrating, and not speaking from a place of deficit, but just acknowledging that this is where we are and this is where we have to go. And, we ended up changing the name. We rebranded somewhere along the way and became Black Life Amplified. And here we are today. So I want to continue talking about the formation, right? The things that were happening behind the scenes. But first, I want to ask Reuben, why would you say community collaboration is so important? And what versus that you have in the scene in order to make this collaboration really work?
I'll start with, I remember in the mid-90s, we used to have shows, a lot of music around unity in the community. And for whatever reason, we can never do it. And I think that what really showed up in our community is that we have a fractured and fragmented impact in our community. We have so many wonderful and amazing leaders, wonderful and amazing organizations, but when we're not collaborating, our impact is just so minimal. And I think this was an example of when we said together, we need to have a collective impact. And so community collaboration is so important because we can optimize our collective impact. We all want to see our communities do well, thrive, emerge, be healed, and we don't have to fight alone in our small pockets and our small neighborhoods, but we can stand up and be a voice collectively. And that's why collaboration is so important, because we optimize and galvanize all of our strengths and all of our resources and energy toward impacting the community in positive ways.
And James, you talked about not wanting to duplicate efforts, because there were decisions being had. Nothing is new under the sun, right? So people were already having discussions about, okay, the pandemic is happening. We still got to keep moving in terms of our organizational goals, our operational goals. Let's just do some digital engagement. Everyone in this panel, every organization that comes together that makes this town possible, they could have all done their own thing. So for you, why was it important to make the decision for Children's and to encourage your other partner organizations to work collaboratively instead of people working individually?
So great question. I think for me and Children's, it was very important because Children's doesn't necessarily have a brand in the community. Now, we do a lot of great service for our people, our families, our kids that come there, but we weren't necessarily having a great brand in the African-American community. So what I wanted to do was say, okay, who are the people that I know are doing great work? Marcus, Stella, Reuben, Tracy at the Spokesman-Recorder, Al the Insight, and how can we get involved in that and support it? So that was the first thing for us. We wanted to make sure we connect to a great brand. And then secondly, as bad as the disparities are in this state for Black people, we need all the efforts that we can. So I wasn't worried about duplicating efforts. I was worried about doubling down on making sure that we can do something tremendous for the community to impact initially COVID-19, and then also its impact on employment, its impact on health and wellness, its impact on finance, and how can we be a part of that by rebranding how Children's is looking at partnership and then collectively getting in the game. And the last thing was about trust. I think Reuben or Stella mentioned it earlier. You couldn't say no. You look at the people on this call, the people behind the scenes. I've been rocking in this community. It'll be 30 years next year. Woohoo. So 30 years strong. And I'm like, all these people I have seen doing the work, they didn't just show up to say, hey, we want to get some news bites and sound bites. They've been doing the work. So it was easy to say yes, easy to collaborate. And then those ways in which we duplicate work, we can say, hey, I'm doing that already. Let's join together and do it collectively and increase capacity. So that was an easy decision for us.
Definitely. Marcus, what would you say have been some of the biggest pain points in participating in this collaboration?
Yeah, this collaboration, first of all, comes together because there's trust built across the partner organizations. And, really for us around here is just maintaining the core elements of what collaboration is all about. And we have, these elements where ALF sits in a role where we convene and we bring leaders in our community together. And it's important for us to bring the leaders necessary for this partnership to really work. I mean, you have three of our most critical health, leaders that know the landscape, know the experts, and can provide expertise to this collaboration. And, that really brings it to life. But then also having our Black media that are known to tell the stories in our community as critical partners to bring it to life digitally as well as through print is critical. So as we try to maintain these core elements, the hard part or the main pain points, I would say, is like keeping the main thing. Like we came together to talk about health equity in our community and making sure that we are bringing expertise from the leaders in our community to the forefront so people can hear their voice, see their names, and see the diversity of our community, and that there is so many leaders out here that can give us the facts and give us the information that we need to know to make critical decisions for ourselves, for our families, and for our community, right? Beyond that, it's really like, how do we maintain the valuing of each other's roles in the partnership, and then addressing any tensions that arise. And because we have trust with each other, whenever there has been tension, we can make a phone call, we can have that conversation and not bring the ego in, but bring off the facts and say, okay, this is what needs to get done. It's really easy to kind of fall in complacency and allow things to bubble up and not address them, which usually, disintegrates collaboration and partnership. But I could say over this past year, we've been really good at saying, okay, there's a tension point. Let's talk about it individually with those that have the tension, as well as collectively as the partnership, to make sure we maintain the main thing. And then I think the last part of it is just the communication, between the leadership of the partnership, as well as the core leaders within the partnership, making the production happen week in and week out, maintaining communication with each other and what we're trying to accomplish. And that's really allowed us to allow this collaboration to really flourish. And I'm appreciative of all that goes into this week in and week out, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've been really fortunate to be able to have the relationships and to continue to build and grow our relationships so that we could have honest and authentic conversations. We laugh about some of the tension or some of the things of like, I don't really like this. I remember calling Marcus and having a conversation with him and being like, so who came up with the name We Good? I don't like it. That name sucks. I don't like it, and being able to honestly say that, knowing that I could come to these meetings and that we laugh with our production team, or there are moments where I'm like, man, I should quit. I don't like this. I'm not happy with the way things are going. And we have this honest conversation to say, okay, that there have been some hiccups. We have some disagreements. There are some tensions, and we work through them. And this is one of the first times that I have seen community really be able to navigate through their challenges and to do it directly with one another, instead of going out and removing themselves for the partnership, saying, I'm just not going to deal with them. I'm not going to work with them. And then I'm going to speak ill of them because I chose not to direct my grievance towards them in an effort to solve it. What I really see from this group is that there was a commitment to doing something to serve our community that was bigger than all of us. And so regardless of whether, it was a big issue about who owns this collaboration and how do we talk about it, to, who's on first and who's on second, we were able to have those conversations even when they were difficult, and to do so honestly with integrity. And also we had fun, and we continue to have fun. These are the conversations in the sort of collaboration in this particular group. It's a let your hair down type of meeting. It's can be honest, tired. Some of our best conversations, town halls, have come out of authentic conversations. We completely went off script, puts up the agenda, said, can we just talk about what's happening? No, we're not good in community. We're in a pandemic. We're at the epicenter of an uprising. Community violence has increased in a way that we haven't seen since the 90s. There are interpersonal issues that are happening. Organizations are losing money due to the pandemic. Our community is hurting. We're not good. Let's not focus on what we think we're supposed to be doing, and let's just show up in the way that we know that community needs us to. And for me, that has been, I think, just one of the most rewarding parts of being a part of this collaboration, is watching us work. Yes, the show was amazing, but if you guys saw the transformations that were happening behind the scenes, I think it's a really strong model for community of what's possible. I want to pivot to Ms. Stella now and ask, you got the call, you agreed to be on, but did you have any reservations at any point, whether it was in the beginning or when we started to find some bumps in the road? Did you have any reservations about being a part of this collaboration?
Well, I didn't have any reservations about being part of the collaboration for all the reasons that everyone else has said. And it was really compelling. I mean, when we were staring down at COVID-19 and seeing members in our community, and as a community clinic, we were on the front lines. And so we were seeing people who were coming in testing positive. There was a lot of fear in our community, and there was fear amongst our staff. So didn't have reservations. I did have concern about what with my schedule and just with my team, would we be able to provide the amount of time that would be needed? And so I have to give a shout out to my director of communications and engagement, Sherry Simpson, because I was able to pass it to her. She was the one that was, as you were talking about, Brittany, all of the behind the scenes meetings and making sure that she could coordinate with our staff here who needed to be on a particular segment. And as you were talking about the name, I really didn't. I wasn't that fond of We Good. I didn't know where that came from either. But I know that uh, there were some different names that were thrown out before we settled on Black Life Amplified. And I remember when Sherry came back with a name, and quite frankly, I don't remember exactly what the name was, but I knew I didn't like it. And I just said, you know what? This doesn't work for me. And this is why, and da da da. And she took it back, and I think as a group, and this is what I love about this collaboration, you all worked it out and you came up with this fabulous name, Black Life Amplified, that is positive, that really is focused on us, on our life, and let's amplify the positive, the good things, the resources and talent that we bring to the table, but let's also shine a light on reality, what is going on in our community. Um, we are there is suffering, there are losses. Let's make sure that we don't just sweep those under the rug, or that they don't get lost. What happens in a state like Minnesota that is overwhelmingly white, oftentimes when you see statistics or data, if you don't dig down, and actually James and I had a conversation early this morning, and Mr. Burroughs is good about calling folks before they have breakfast to talk about a project, but that's what I love about him. But we talked about the fact that oftentimes when we see data, we see a lot of data in healthcare, you have to get the disaggregate data. You actually have to get the data. And for us, we actually ask for data by zip code, so that, and even by neighborhood, so we can see exactly what is going on with the folks that are coming in and that are touched by our organization day in and day out.
I have not been getting those before breakfast phone calls, but I'm glad that you're answering the phone anyway, and that you're continuing to do the work. And you bring up a really important point about the lack of data that there exists sometimes, and the lack of representation when it comes to public conversations about health and wellness, and how Black people often aren't centered. And so this collaboration is incredibly important. Although we have expanded once we became Black Life Amplified, that was around the time when we made the decision, it can't just be COVID, because COVID fatigue was setting in. People were tired of hearing about it, talking about it. We had to think of new and innovative ways in which we could keep public health at the forefront of this initiative, but to make sure that people didn't forget, and that we didn't even forget, that our health is inextricably tied to public safety, to social justice. The disparities that our communities disproportionately are facing impact our health. It's why we have the comorbidities that we have, which led us to being disproportionately impacted by the pandemic in the first place. And as we became more expansive, we never disregarded health. We never stopped talking about COVID, but we started doing it in more innovative ways, and integrating other issues of Black life, and Black life particularly here in the Twin Cities, into our conversations. Now, one of those challenging conversations that we had behind the scenes was At some point in time, the vaccine became available, or we knew that it would become available. And so we had to think, are we going to, as this initiative, as this collaborative of Black organizations, are we going to be pro-vaccine? There are multiple health entities here, but Black people have a really challenging and unique history with the medical system and with vaccines in particular. So the possible thing to do, we tell people not to get vaccinated, or do we not talk about it, knowing that our people are proportionately dying and getting really ill? Or do we take a bold and radical stance to be pro-vaccine? So Ms. Stella, James, Reuben, I'll defer to you. Why was it important for us to be pro-vaccine? And I'll also add the disclaimer, as you all rock, paper, scissors over who will go first. I was not in support of us being pro-vax. I still have not been vaccinated. I support it, but I have hesitancy, as many people in our community do. But you all took the stance that regardless of the hesitancy, we still need to let people know that this is an important thing to do. Why was that?
Well, I'll start off. For me, I know the importance of vaccines. We make sure that within our clinic, and even in my own personal life with my children and grandchildren, that we vaccinate our children, and that we talk to parents about the importance of vaccines. I think what has happened is that there's so much misinformation that is spread at a lightning speed over social media, over the internet, so that people now are getting their source of information that they believe as truth through sources that really do not have the knowledge. And it has turned into even this political kind of a cultural discourse, if you will, about the vaccine, and people are calling themselves anti-vaxxers or what have you. And what was important to me is that I knew that this was and that we needed to make sure that our people, that African Americans, that Black people were stepping up and being able to get the vaccine. I took the vaccine early when it became available at Northpoint, and got vaccinated on camera. It was something that my team wanted us to be able to do, and I agreed to do it. And I also think that what is different this time around is that, and we needed to get that information out to our community, is that there were Black scientists that were involved in the creation of these vaccines. Dr. Kizzy Corbett, for example, with the Moderna vaccine. And there were Black doctors and Black scientists that were involved, and Black people that were involved in the clinical trials, more so than have ever been involved in clinical trials. And so when I saw that, and it was important that that information gets out to our community, is that for one of the first times in history, we were directly involved in the beginning of developing the vaccine, in the clinical trials of the vaccine. We had our major medical institutions that were monitoring the vaccine and making sure that there was integrity and that the vaccines were safe.
James, did you want to go next, talking about why it was important to take a public stance to support the vaccine during this collaboration?
Sure. I'm going to twist it a little bit. I think my public stance was more about, I was pro-information about making an informed decision. As Stella said, one of the things that was different this time was there were African-American doctors, quite a few of them, involved in the trials for a variety of the vaccines, Moderna, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson. And that's different than what we talk about when we all go back to think about Henrietta Lacks and how she was taken advantage of and her cells were, or we talk about the Tuskegee experiment. We were nowhere near involved in that, and we were also used as guinea pigs and test animals, basically, although we were human beings around that. So this was different. And I heard a lot of misinformation that Stella talked about what was going to do to the vaccine, what was going to do to your hormones. It was going to be a chip placed in you. And I said, you know what? One of the things I want to do in this partnership is get enough information so all of us know and can make an informed decision about whether to take it. So we at Children's partnered in this to do a variety of things on our own, but also with this collaboration about vaccine hesitancy. And we made sure that folks could ask any questions they wanted to. I wanted to give a big shout out to Adriene Thornton, who's an infectious prevention nurse and co-host of the show with you, Brittany, and she's on vacation and chilling on the beach somewhere, so we decided not to have her on. But she's done a great job of breaking down in plain English why the vaccine is important, what it could do for you, and the impact it have on your health, what the impacts of COVID are in our communities, how it's disproportionately impacting our Black communities, and tell personal stories around that, which was important. I also want to thank Dr. Zeke McKinney, who's a doctor at Health Partners, but he's been all over the community with me and with us talking about vaccine hesitancy. He's been a part of a trial up here, recruiting Black and brown people to be a part of that trial and get information. So when we got that information, we said we got to get out to community so they can make an informed choice. And in addition to that, personally, I ended up getting scheduled for the vaccine in early January, but I caught COVID the week before. So I was like, okay, I was trying to get the vaccine. I got COVID, and blessedly, and it was a mild case. I lost taste and smell, but I didn't have to get hospitalized or put on a ventilator. But I was like, this is serious enough that people are dying who look like me on a regular basis. If this vaccine can help that and we can give enough information to folks to make an informed choice, I want them to make that choice. And that's something that I think this partnership has said all along. We're not necessarily pushing it down your throat, but we don't want to make a decision based upon information you don't have or false information. So I think that was important to us at Children's, and making sure that we're partnered and aligned with folks who can give that complete information so folks can make that decision.
Yeah, you bring up a really great point, and definitely shout out to Adriene, who is living her best life in Mexico right now. I'm a little jealous, but she 1000% deserves it. Adriene has made COVID so digestible, so easy to understand. There's so much information that's out there. It's really hard to source what's true, what's not, what's applicable to me as a Black person, as a person with pre-existing conditions. Where can I go to find more information, to get tested, to get vaccinated? And Adriene has done a phenomenal job of taking information that is traditionally really inaccessible and making it digestible for the everyday person within community. If it had not been for this town hall, and if it had not been for these private conversations that we were having during production to figure out what we wanted to bring to the public, I personally wouldn't have known everything that I know about the virus today, about the vaccine. I do plan to get vaccinated. I've encouraged my family members to do the same. I would have never in a million years thought that I would be pushing people to get the COVID-19 vaccine. I'm not anti-vaccination by any means, but I had a lot of hesitancy about this vaccine for good reason. We've never lived through a pandemic before, so this is new for all of us. And I think it was really important for us to take the time, not to minimize what we were experiencing or the concerns or the hesitancy that exist within our community, but to say that these are valid concerns. Your questions are valid. If you put them in the chat, if you send us an email, we'll make sure that we address them. We started on Zoom, so we used to actually have our audience members in the Zoom room with us where they could literally direct message a panelist or comment in the chat or give us their feedback, whether it was positive or negative, but we were able to receive that information and to respond accordingly. And I think that's been another powerful part of this collaboration and of this show, is that we're able to give information to our audience in real time, and our audience is able to give us information in real time so that we can serve and show up in the best way possible. I want to go back to James now, talking about this collaboration and how it came to be. There were a lot of private conversations and challenging conversations. And something that we really wanted to be mindful of is, this show is a reflection of our community and what's happening in community. And as much as we love us and we're excellent and we continue to grow and to stretch ourselves, we have some old and archaic ways of thinking sometimes that prevent us from moving forward. It prevents us from being able to collaborate in healthy ways. And a big part of that was misogyny. So for you, why was it important for us to address the ways in which we as a community have talked to and talked about our women?
So I think it was very important, Brittany. And what I'll say is, having been up here 30 years, there's a lot of great leaders in these organizations and a lot of great leaders doing magnificent work. I want to go back in time for a second. I met Stella in the early 90s when I was on the board at Summit Academy, and she was the vice president at the time at Summit. And I learned a lot from her in my role as a board member, and she's a dynamic leader. She eventually left there and went over to Northpoint. But what I saw, I'll be honest with you, in the community sometimes was the voice of the Black woman wasn't necessarily being heard. And since that was the case, I was like, okay, whenever I get a chance to be a leader or be in a partnership or making sure that we collectively connect, I want to make sure that Black women are a part of this partnership. So when Batala's involved, you were involved, Stella's involved, Tracy over at the Spokesman-Recorder, to make a conscientious decision as people can see, what, they're partnering together. Because sometimes, I'll be honest with you, in community, we can let others dictate who's going to be the leader. Mm-hmm. And they'll go to the same people. And they typically go to Black men. Let's be candid and honest. Until recently, some more Black women are being sought after for their expertise. But I got tired of that. And I said, you know what? We're going to make sure that we not only abandon that, but we're going to intentionally show that Black men and Black women are working together. Because when the narrative gets changed or defined by someone else, sometimes we're pitted against each other. And I never wanted that to be the case. And in this case, in this partnership, it has never been that. Stella and I have known each other for years. She accepts my before breakfast calls. Brittany, you get my after 10 o'clock calls or texts. So, I spread the love to all the women in this partnership. And Batala just calls me anytime she wants to. But I think that's so important to emulate for our young people as well. And by young people, I don't mean necessarily our teenagers. I mean our 20-somethings, our 30-somethings, because they need to see that collaboration. Because I'll be honest, sometimes they don't see it and they get frustrated with us as more senior leaders, and they say, you know what, y'all don't care about me, but I care about the Leslie Redmonds, the Jeff Aggies, the Anika Bowie's, the young lady now who's over in charge, Ms. Angela Myers, who's over at NAACP in charge now. We got to emulate for them this collective partnership and get rid of this misogyny, and that's I thought was real important to me. I think it's important to Reuben and Marcus and others as well.
Definitely. You brought up a really great point, naming the leaders that you just named, all of whom I love and deeply admire. We not only were intentional, and it's literally every single show, we're having conversations. I think I don't want to say that we overshot, but what's amazing about this collaboration is we have highlighted so many amazing Black women. Our producer stands like, hey, now, okay, we could put a Black man on this panel too, like that's okay, which is great. And so we're thinking about equity and representation in ways that often aren't prioritized. And James, when you bring up the young leaders that you mentioned, there can also be a divide in terms of generational leadership, right? The leaders of today, they're starting out much younger, and they're getting farther much faster. And so what happened? While that's amazing, what it can do sometimes is create a tension within community in which it feels like, the your generation, the existing generation, the new generation of leaders have a clash or a tension, especially when there's a difference of opinion on how to get to a common ground or the best way to go about addressing a particular issue. And on this show, something that we're always talking about is how do we include more youth voice? How do we make sure that the people on this town hall see themselves as, as much as possible, and that we recognize that we can work together across different generations. I see myself somewhere in the middle. I just turned 30, so I'm not super young, but I'm also still continuing to develop and establish myself as a leader. And never have I ever felt like I didn't have a place at the table, or like my voice didn't matter simply because of my age. Now, to James' point of us being pitted against each other, that's definitely a real thing. There are other town halls that have happened because of the pandemic and us being in quarantine. Lots of people are doing podcasts from their homes and doing some panel discussions. But we always point to reach across the aisle to say, we'd love to have you as part of our show. Keep up the good work. We love what you're doing. Even internally, as we're clashing and bump heads sometimes, we're making sure that we deal with our stuff so that it doesn't become an issue where we can't perform publicly because of a disagreement that may have happened privately. I want to pivot to you, Reuben, and have you talk about the importance of us really making sure we have our inside conversations, have those private conversations so that we can show up publicly and do the work. Why do you think that's important and a necessary strategy for collaboration?
The show could have been named Black Women Amplified, Black Health Amplified, Black Collaboration Amplified. But it is Black Lives Amplified. And what that really means is that we show up with our whole selves. And it's important that we can get together, disagree, have a robust intellectual discourse, and walk out the room and lift Black women up and lift Black health up, right, in an appropriate way in our communities as one. I think when you think about our community, and we are a very diverse community of African descendants of slaves, African immigrants, but all together, we want the best for Black people. And the beauty of this body is that when we walked outside of those rooms, whether it be outside of a production meeting where we just didn't agree what the show content would be, we showed up and supported the show. And I think that it really speaks to the new paradigm as we think about our community and how we show up, is that let's have that robust intellectual debate. That has been a part of our history, part of every social movement in our history. But when we show up to that march, when we show up on that stage, when we show up in an advocacy moment, in a supporting a Black business, we do that as one collectively. And this was a really good representation of that. But honoring the critical discourse, supporting the critical discourse with respect and acceptance is a key element of that.
Thank you, Reuben. I want to pivot to you, Marcus, and to talk more about what it looks like to lead and to collaborate, removing your ego. Because, we've mentioned, we haven't gotten to much detail, but there have been disagreements. There have been friction. We haven't always been on one accord, and yet we always seem to come together. And I think a big part of that is because we were able to remove our ego. So what does that look like in real time? And what advice do you have for other leaders who are looking to do the same?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Brittany. Thinking about ego and all this as I'm listening to Reuben and to Stella and JB here, I just think about, first of all, like we all are all in community together and we've had long lasting relationships. I think I've known JB 20 years now, Stella, 5 or so years, Reuben, we go back 20 plus, right? And so just thinking about like we have relationships outside of this partnership. And so whenever we've called upon each other, it's because we all know that we have the same intent, that we want to do what's best for community, right? And so ego can't get in the way, because ego is usually the dissolver of all collaboration, because it's like, oh, I'm better, or I know better. And it's realizing that you don't know better and you need others around you doing great work. It's when we first talked about this as a team, first, like internally, can we bring, a town hall to life? We were looking at, oh yeah, we'll just do the 3 of us on the team and we'll get together. Running a town hall requires many hands, many heads, many minds coming together. And, I want to first give a shout out to the production team, Coach Candace and Ashley and Stan and Brittany yourself and Sherry and Batala and JB. Like, folks are meeting weekly to bring this thing to life. Ernest on my team. but it takes many minds, many hands to make good things come together. And so ego can't get in the way. And what was beautiful is that as we've come together, we're always looking out for each other. Like, well, how can we include other folks? How can we include each other in the creation and the ongoing partnership in this? And when when others may, have had to fall off briefly to handle whatever business they had, we're always reaching back out to each other to make sure we're all good, and that, you're a valued member, right? So ego, it has to start with trust and how you build trust. And you have to come into the partnership with a level of trust, and that it builds from there. You can't come with a deficit of trust. And so if you already assume that this person is going to do you wrong, it's never going to work in the first place. So go take care of yourself and whatever trust issues you may have with other people, and deal with those so that we can get to the work, right? And then I think the other part of this ego is that you as an individual leader can't do all the work. You have to rely on others, right? And so for myself, it's how do I lead through my team and allow my team to bring whatever they have to offer to this? How do I empower others to bring their leadership and not be, the last voice or the one that makes the decisions? Like, no, this is a collective decision for all of us. And that takes the ego out of it, because if one person has to make the decision for the partnership or for the production team, that removes the accountability for all of us that we're in this together, right? And then I think the funny thing around ego is, like, I'll own the name We Good. As a team, we came up with the name. We thought about the euphemism, like, hey man, you good? You good? Yeah, we good. And, part of my team came up, that's how I own it. So no ego to it when the folks say, hey, it's time to change the name and rebrand. It's like, okay, if this is a collective decision, let's go for it. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the product and making sure that we're demystifying the information that's coming out to our community. It's making sure that we're moving opinion and putting fact first, and allowing the expertise, that's the brilliance of our community, and that everyone's a leader, to come and bring that to the forefront. So ego has no place in collaboration, and if anything, what is happening is that iron is sharpening iron in this place. We all know how dynamic everyone is in the partnership. So it's like, oh, I got to bring my best self. So it's not an ego like, I'm going to hate on that person, but it's a ego in the sense of like, oh, I can't slack. I have to come with it this week because I know the others around me are going to bring it. So, I just really appreciate the folks. And, Stella and I have a great relationship, her being on my board, but she's always looked out for me personally as a leader as I've come up, and I'm in that in between. And we're talking about generational leadership, and I'm in between at 40 now. And I'm like, okay, I'm not old, I'm not young, but it's been important for folks that like Stella and JB and others to invest in me. So I'm like, okay, well, how do I return that in favor? Both investing in them, but then investing in the next generation of folks. So I think each of us brings that element to the partnership. And even within the production team, constantly there's, introductions being made across the partnership. Hey, do you know this person? Or if you're not, you need to get to know this person, because I think they might be critical to the work you're leading or the work that you're involved in. And so just, finding more ways for us to collaborate beyond the partnership has been one of the added benefits of having this collaboration, because we get to see each other in the work. We're not just, distant from each other and saying, oh yeah, I think they're doing some really good work. No, we're actually working together so we can bring that element so that we can find more ways to work together. So I really appreciate that about what we do here.
You bring up a really good point about the trust being there and how the relationships were there. And that's been a really key part of why this show has been so successful. Is it does take work. We're meeting twice a week to get this show produced, and we're constantly thinking about, who do we know? Who can we call on? Who can put in a good word for us so that this person will come on the show? Does this person trust the people who are on this production team for them to feel comfortable to come onto the show and to share their truth? Do they have existing relationships with our partner organizations in order for them to want to be a part of this collaboration? And the majority of the time, the answer has overwhelmingly been And yes, absolutely, the relationship is there, the connection is there, the trust is there, and the willingness to come on board and to advance this mission is there. And so I do want to offer to others in community who are hoping to do collaborations to, even if it's not building the entire initiative with a large group of people, but whenever you can, think about how you can continue to add on to your team, to extend an invitation and to allow your network of support and community to grow, to really deepen those relationships and to uplift the gifts and the talents of other people. As Marcus said, it could have easily been the people on the team. It could have just been AALF. It could have just been Insight. It could have been any of these organizations working individually, but we recognize that the voices within our community were strong, we're brilliant, and we're the experts at many issues that if we allowed our platform to be extended to them, they could then show up with their brilliance, with their excellence, and share their truth for the benefit of our audience in a way that we couldn't have done on our own. So we definitely want to encourage folks to continue to reach across the aisle, reach across different sectors, and to do what needs to be done so that all the work doesn't fall on you and so that all of the needs of our community can be met. When we talk about ego, we talk about removing that, but that doesn't mean necessarily not advocating for self, right? There have been many conversations when I'm like, hey, y'all, as the host, as the one who has to deliver this information, I'm uncomfortable. Like, don't have me out here looking crazy, right? I'm trusting y'all, but like I have some needs that I need you to help meet, right? And our panelists and our producers have done the same thing. James has represented Children's many times and said, listen, as a sponsor of this town hall and as a community partner, what we not gonna do is this, And so James, I'm going to you. We had many conversations about, as we expanded, we shifted in our purpose a little bit. We made a pivot. We're not just talking about COVID and the numbers anymore. We're getting more into other issues that do impact our health and our wellness. And that was challenging to think about the legality of it, right? And the just what does that imply for the organizations who are associated? One of the issues that we had, that James was very vocal about was, do we cover the Derek Chauvin trial? What does this mean for a health organization to be talking about this civil case or this legal issue? So James, share with us, what were your concerns, why, and how did we get through it?
So that's a very good question. And I did have some concerns, but the concerns were less about the trial itself. It's more about how we want to tie this into health equity. So public safety is about health equity. If we're dying at the hands of police officers or at the hands of ourselves in our own communities, that's a public health issue. Matter of fact, if we're not considering those things, the social determinants of health and health equity, we're neglecting those things that are important to us. I want to back up a little bit. So the Chauvin trial was one thing, but the thing that got me the most before that was the public safety show we were going to do and did do around Operation Safety Net. I lost it a little bit. I was like, listen, I don't want this to ever be a propaganda show about anybody saying this is the stuff that AALF supports, Northpoint supports, Minnesota Community Care supports, or Children supports. Operation Safety Net was something the governor came up with, a lot of local agencies, and that's what they thought was best. But what I said to the team at the time was, I got a feeling we're policing our community more than they need to be policed. I got some problems with some of the premises of Operation Safety Net. I understand we don't want the town to burn like it did before, but I also want to be addressed those things that caused it to burn. It wasn't just the murder of George Floyd. It was a lot of other things we're not doing in our Black community, in our Latino community, Asian community. So we went back and forth. And I at one point I said, listen, okay, I'll do it. Children's cares about our community and cares about our safety, but it has to be done in a way that's integrity about we're asking the tough questions. And Brittany, I want to shout out to you and others who put together the script that we held the mayor of Minneapolis to task. We held the public safety commissioner to task. We asked those tough questions because we're not going to be propaganda. We're going to be about what's best for the Black community. And we ask those tough questions and we get to better places and spaces. Just like the Chauvin trial, you kept pushing and we kept pushing and we can have those questions. Children's is about making sure we're every family's essential partner. And if we're going to be every family's essential partner in health, I got to be concerned about Black maternal health. I got to be concerned about public safety in the community. I got to be concerned about food security. I got to be concerned about making sure that there's a communication station in this that's not biased and prejudiced and going to look at it a different slant that we should for our community. So I was convinced. My ego got out the way, and I look at ego as enthusiasm, greatness, and being outstanding. So I'm gonna always be that, and those who know me knows I have an opinion. I'm gonna give it, but it's gonna always be about us and making sure that I'm protecting us and make sure that my 8-year-old daughter can look at something and be like, "Hey, Daddy, you did that with high integrity, and so did the people you're working with." So I love the fact that we did it. I love the fact that we covered it. I love the fact that we, looked at health equity. I love the fact that even after that show, we continued to push and say, Operation Safety Net and others, did you do the right thing? Can we do this a different way? The answer is yes, by the way, in the future. And do we do a way of partnering with community? So I love this team. I love these meetings every week. I love pushing. And to Marcus's point, those relationships develop over time with trust. And if I trust you, you can say anything to me and I won't get offended by it. I'll just say, okay, how do we get better collectively for what we're working for? And that's our people. And that's what I care so much about. And I'll be honest, too, there's certain conversations, and maybe we shouldn't say this, maybe we should. I love the group that we're working with and our partners. Not everybody can be a part of this. So not everybody can say, hey, I want to write a big check and come in and your track record don't show that you're doing the things you're supposed to be doing. I'm personally going to have my vote and be like, no, I'm good. Back to I'm good again, or we good. But I'm like, I don't necessarily need you to be a part of this. You can do your own thing, but I don't want you to be a part of this because your track record doesn't show that you're moving in that direction. So I'll stop there. But Brittany, it's been a good push and pull in this partnership for me.
I definitely agree. And, there's something to be said about creating space where we're willing to accept feedback, and to hear about how we're showing up and to give that feedback in love, but also a safe space to really take a step back and reflect on how we're showing up in the work that we're doing for our community. James, you bring up a really important point about the work that's being done behind the scenes. We had the show about Operation Safety Net. We had our local public safety officials come on and tell us what was going to happen during the trial. And then when Daunte Wright was murdered, we watched the exact opposite of what we were told was going to happen take place. And so we're going to continue having those conversations. But what I want our audience to know is we have been in communication with the team since the moment that Daunte Wright was killed and we started seeing what was happening in Brooklyn Center. And we've been reaching out to them to say, this is not in alignment with what you communicated to our audience. And we want to invite you back on the show to have the conversation. We have not been successful in having them back on, not because we haven't reached out, but because they have not a priority. But that's something that we're going to continue to push. And regardless of whether or not they on, we're going to have a conversation about public safety, about our health, about our wellness, and how we want to respond and what we want to see within community. And we've realized this is a really important platform to have those conversations, to leverage those relationships. We just had the mayor and city manager of Brooklyn Center on our show. People are now recognizing that this is not just an online forum or some small community thing that doesn't matter. The show actually holds weight to the point that our public officials are coming to us and asking, can they come on and talk about the issues that our community is concerned with? And traditionally, the answer is yes, like James said, as long as it does not become propaganda. So we have no issue with pushing back against something that a panelist says or asking really critical questions or allowing our audience to even do the same thing because we deserve to have those conversations. Our audience and our community deserve to have answers, especially with our local elected officials. And when there is a lack of transparency, we are going to do everything within our power to make sure that this platform gets rid of that divide between those in positions of power and those who are directly affected by the decisions of those in positions of power, so that we can continue to move forward in a spirit of excellence and to take care of our community. That show on public safety in the upcoming trial was one of our highest watched shows, even though we were very reserved about doing it. And ultimately, over the past year, we've had really phenomenal success. We've had over 20,000 clicks. over 3,000 engagements. We've had reached and had over 80,000 views. We've hosted about 33 town halls in the past year. And again, we hadn't done this before. So this was us being willing to take a risk collectively, to fall fast, as Reuben would say, or to fail fast, being willing to just jump in, take a risk and say, you know what, it's worth it to do this. And what you all have shown is that you are appreciative of this work as much as we are appreciative of being able to do the work. And so I have to give a very special thank you to our audience, to our partners, to our sponsors, because we had no idea what our impact was going to be, and it continues to grow every time. One of the reasons that we did decide to expand the show and to continue to take risks in what the conversation was going to be, in addition to COVID-19, was because George Floyd was murdered in our community. So all of a sudden, our home, our backyard, became the epicenter of a global uprising. Every single news outlet in the world at one point was talking about George Floyd here in Minneapolis. And as the Black leaders here within the Twin Cities, we could not move forward without addressing it ourselves. So I want to go to Marcus. I know it was a risk. That was kind of the first time that we're like, we cannot continue with business as usual, given what's happening in our community. And you were in support of us being expansive and saying, all right, let's address it. Talk about why.
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to take these risks and bring these stories to life and amplifying what is happening and what's true in our community. One of the things that I get privy to in the position that I have here at the forum is we'll have various entities, we'll have community members, we'll have system, players, whether it's, the governor's office or the mayor's office, always reaching out because they want to engage with our community. And oftentimes, these conversations, may happen more in isolation and we don't realize it because it's like, well, if you're not in the work, you're not getting that access. And it's like, well, how do we bring that access to everybody and make it more accessible to everybody, in your daily life, because you care, you want to know what's going on in the community, right? So for us, it wasn't that hard to say, it's important for us to go beyond COVID. We knew COVID wasn't going anywhere. As we got through May, we're like, okay, this isn't a 2-3 week thing. This is going to be with us for a while now. And so it's important for us. And I think, Britt, you said earlier, it's like, how do we keep it fresh? Because we knew that, the pandemic was going to have its fatigue moments, and we were realizing it in different ways in our community because we were, not experiencing just the health impacts of COVID, but the economic impacts of COVID and the educational impacts with our kids being at home and falling behind. And so as we started to hear all these different intersections, and then you have this moment in time where, we watch in real time, a man lose his life to the knee of those that are, supposed to protect us. And what that did to everyone that was sitting at home and had to witness it and could no longer hide from it. It was like, we have to address this, and we have to address it in a way that brings the many elements to it, because yes, we were talking about police, killings, and that this is not a new pandemic for the Black community, right? And we were talking about the fact that what it could do to our community, but then there was a debate happening in our community around public safety as a whole. And it's like, we have to address this because this is important to what health equity really is about. And if we can't have healthy conversations and bringing the different viewpoints from the various leaders in our community, we're going to do a disservice by having a show like this, right? So for us at the forum and the team, it's like we were hungry to have, an opportunity to create that access point for everyone to see kind of where, beyond the cameras of the TV and things like that, what is the real message that is actually happening? Who are the folks that are the messengers? And so I think it was just important. And I think it's just, overall it's played out and as everything took place. I think one of our other highly watched shows was our return to school, return to education or back to school episode, where we were bringing education in and they were sharing what it's going to be like to bring our kids back to school. And I think all of these intersections with our lives really need to be amplified, because solutions can't be brought to bear, or the solution makers can't be supported without them having access to the full community, and not just a few people that get to be in the room or get to be at the table, right? And so Black Life Amplified gives that access point to all of us. And, I think there's more to come, and I think there's more ways for us to amplify, our lives and what we want to see in the future, for sure.
Absolutely. You bring up a really good point about that back to school episode being one of our highest watched episodes. And I just think about, if this platform didn't exist and if we didn't take this risk, what would all of the parents and concerned community members have done to get that information? Would it have been accessible? Would they have been able to ask those questions? People genuinely wanted to know how their children were going to be safe, as school opened back up. And that is a valid conversation. And I think it's important for us to name that the concerns that we have about our wellness are valid, even if they aren't often being talked about. And so this has given us a space to not just sit within ourselves with those concerns, but to have the conversations out loud and to challenge people. We also talked a lot behind the scenes about decolonizing our workspace and decolonizing our conversations, both publicly and privately. I remember calling James and saying, did I push the mayor enough? Did I ask him hard questions? Like what was your framework on it? Because we are a collective, it was a safe space for me as a community member to, regardless of what elected official I'm talking to or what community member, to ask the necessary questions, because we owed that to our community. And it wasn't going to be as big of a risk of if I was doing this show independently, where they could easily say, okay, we're just not going to work with Brittany anymore. She makes us feel uncomfortable. She challenges us, but I've got James behind me. I've got Marcus behind me. I've got Stella behind me. I've got Reuben. I've got Batala. There is so much power in saying, we collectively have this concern and you need to address it, versus one of us going off on our own and saying, okay, I really want you to respond to me, because then it makes it so much harder, especially for those in positions of power, to evade accountability when they know that we're coming together collectively and we're demanding our answers, right? In decolonizing our space, we also were intentional to have conversations in a non-traditional way. When we talked about the election and the importance of that, Louis Blaze came on and spit a verse about the importance of voting. Just last week, when we did our cipher on healing, we just impromptu decided, all right, we're going to incorporate some music and some spoken word and some vocals, and we're just going to have a moment to just vibe out and to heal, because it's been stressful. It has been a heavy time going through this trial, going through the pandemic, the community violence, all of those things. So as much as we want to sit up here and be professional, we are at 100% and at all times people, Black people at that. So we're going to bring our culture to the forefront, and we're not going to apologize for it. The conversation that we had on addressing community trauma, we invited comedians in to have the conversation, was saying we who's white comedian, he's invited to the couch. So we had the conversation both on the show publicly as well as behind the scenes about who we invite into a space may not be a Black person, but is trusted, and how often do we want to make those concessions? So being able to produce as well as to host the show. And, I've even had conversations with James about my comfort level as a host. And, I come from two different backgrounds of being in traditional media, but also being, a member of the hip hop community, and where does that intersection exist? And so how do I show up in the space and show my level of comfort, and how formal and traditional do we want to be in this particular media outlet? And so making conscious decisions about the way in which Black media is represented has been incredibly important. And I feel like has been a big part of our success. I'm looking at the time, so I'm going to skip ahead for a little bit and go to the next section, which is about reclaiming our wellness. And I want to ask Ms. Stella, for you, you're the executive at Northpoint Health and Wellness. For you, what is the definition or the difference between health and wellness, and why are they so important?
Well, before I answer that, there's been, and I keep this quote on my desk. And so as I was listening to the discussion, I said, I gotta say this. And so most of us know this comes from James Baldwin. To be Black and relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all of the time. And I think that all of us know that to be true, and especially during this time. Um, and I think that that is one of the things that this show, this town hall, has helped us to do. When we talk about being with our people, being um, able to speak our truth, to be able to show up in our true, authentic self, helps with all of the stress that comes with being in a rage almost all of the time because of everything that is happening to us, to our community that we see. And so it is really difficult. So I wanted to just put that quote out there so that we give our ancestor, our brother James Baldwin, some props for that. But when we look at the difference between health and wellness, so health, and we are a clinic. It is about your current state, and it is all about looking at the different um, medical, dental, all of the numbers. Where are you at on that spectrum in that point in time? But when we talk about wellness, and that's why North Point is health and wellness. Wellness is looking at the full spectrum. One of the pillars that we focus on is that we talk about whole person integrated care. And what that means is that we see people as a whole person, and that you're connected to a family, that you're connected to a community. So we're not just seeing you as you showing up with this set of symptoms and we're giving you a diagnosis. We're seeing you as your whole person and understanding that your wellness and your well being is a result of a combination of things. And I heard James talk about the social determinants of health, um, your where you live, the impact of public safety, policing, on you, the impact of employment, and even those of us that are in relatively important, high salary positions, understand our blackness shows up, right? And that in of itself oftentimes creates conflict, and we're in that state of rage, and that can lead to stress. So that is how here at North Point we look at health and wellness.
Thank you. I want to ask also, as we begin to wrap up, what do you want people to know about North Point Health and Wellness in terms of the services you provide and just your commitment to community?
Well, what I want people to know is that we have been in North Minneapolis. This is our 53rd year. We are in a capital campaign. We are expanding our campus so that we can better serve the community. We are a community governed organization. We have a community board. So Reuben and I have sister clinics, in that we are federally qualified health centers, and that is the model of community clinics, that we are truly community governed, in that the majority of our boards are patients of our clinic, and that's who we report to. So my bosses are actually the patients. So North Point is here. Our main number is 612-543-2500. And it's not just about services that we provide within our campus or our four walls, even though it's medical, dental, and behavioral health. But we made a decision a long time ago that it was important for us to be present in the community, so that we are out and about. We are in schools. We do health screenings out in the community, because it is extremely important that we are seen in the community, and that we are meeting people where they are at, because that is where their health and their wellness is happening, within the communities where they live.
Thank you. I want to pivot to James now. I want to ask you about your philosophy on health equity and how and why more organizations should look for non-traditional ways of engaging with community. You know, you have taken a lead as the VP of Children's, as well as the Director of Health Equity, to make sure that Children's is showing up. But what advice do you have for other organizations to do the same?
The first advice I give to big healthcare companies is stop talking and start acting. So one of the things that we at Children's, when Marcus and I talked about this partnership, as we got into it, I was like, hey, Marcus, we're a big company. We're not the biggest in the world, but, make sure that we invest in you and ALF to make sure this keeps going forward, and the partnership. So we invested some of our dollars in that, but more importantly, our resource and people. Adriene Thornton comes on every 2 weeks, and she's there talking about COVID-19 and the impact it has on the community and breaking it down for the public. So we invested that way as well. I'd say also, too, health equity is not just about patient-facing things. It's about how does your infrastructure change in your healthcare institution. So we spent a lot of time over the last 2 years making sure that we have a more diverse executive leadership team. So you asked me today, our 9 people that report to our CEO, 3 of them are Black. That's 33% of the 9 people report to him. Out of our entire leadership team of 23 people, our senior leadership team, 34% of those are people of color. We're spending more money in communities of color and with businesses of color. So holding me accountable, holding others accountable in healthcare is important. We can all write a statement. We can all talk a good game. We can all join organizations, but for me, it's like, how do those actions change for health equity? And then I say also, too, when we're not doing things right, because I'll be honest with you, we need to get better at changing the culture for our patients and families, and also our long-term employees of color who've been at Children's for a while. We're not living up to the creed of making sure that we are really listening and changing and joining together. Those are some of our values. We got to do better there. We got to do better and listen to them and change the culture and environment which we're working on. So I think for me, for everybody on this call, health equity is about joining together, investing money and time, and then also, too, doing events collectively together. We have an event coming up on May 22nd where we're partnering with the YWCA and Children's Minnesota, but that's what I called Stella about earlier, and making sure Northpoint get involved, the SoCa Minnesota Community Cares and ALF and Latino Lead and CALS, and also the Tawahi Foundation. We're going to have vaccinations for the community. We're going to bring it out. It'll be walk-in clients, and I'll give you more information so you can send out walk-in clients on the 22nd from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. and making sure that people have access to the vaccines, access to information. Pimento Relief Fund is going to do some food and other things as well. But it's that kind of thing, doing something. I'm tired about being in a city where George Floyd gets murdered, Dante Wright gets murdered, Philando Castile gets murdered, Jamar Clark gets murdered, and we just talk about those things. Now is the time to act, and health equity could be a part of that action.
About that action is super important. I want to pivot to Reuben and ask, how have you been working to bring Minnesota community care beyond its clinic walls and into the community?
I think I could build upon many things here. One of the things we recognized early on is that health is in the community. Health is not defined inside the walls of a clinic to treat the sick or the ill, but health happens all over. It's in our water. It's in the collective trauma or racialized trauma that impacts our community. It's from our genetic and historical trauma. Health happens in the food. Food is health. So health is everywhere. And so our pivot in our organization is to recognize that as an institution, with 16, nearly 20 clinics in St. Paul, and now stretching across the state, that we cannot be so focused on what happens in our clinic, but we have to be showing up outside of our clinics and thinking about how do we become more of a public health institution and not just a clinical care institution. And that's really at the core of what a community health center is. James talked about being about that action, right? And so whether it be George Floyd incidents, how do we show up to help bridge the gap in terms of mental health and wellness in communities through telehealth services, through outreach, through community health workers, to say that, hey, our community is suffering, and show up differently. And it may not be billable. We may not get no recognition for it at all from any other state or any funding entities, but it's the thing to do to improve the health of our communities. One of the things I really appreciate about ALF is that about 2 years ago, Marcus shared with me the plan to become a convener, that ALF was about building connections. And he wanted to bring together the influencers and the builders to build a wellness in our communities, to build wealth in our communities, to help elevate our entire communities and amplify them. And healthcare operates in the same operative model. We are at the core of the health. We as health institutions, we're at the core of elevating communities. And so we have to get communities healthier, and it can't just happen in the drugs we prescribe, but it happens in the impact we have collectively on our communities as a whole.
Oh, there we go. Very true. Our health is everywhere. And so we have to be responsive to what's happening around us and looking really holistically at the work that we're doing. You bring up a really great point about ALF being a convener. So I want to pivot to Marcus. ALF, I see them as a leadership organization, right? It's the African American Leadership Forum. They're not necessarily being a health and wellness entity yet, still steps to collaboration and continue to be convener. So talk about why it was important for you to lean into health and wellness, not just Black Life Amplified, but you've had other community healers and behavioral health practitioners who have done, virtual events, especially during the pandemic. You incorporate that into the conferences that you do, as well as, the resources that you provide even to your fellows. Why is it so important to talk about health and wellness and to make that a primary focus when you're doing leadership development?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Health and wellness have always been a critical component to the forum and the work that we do. We've done work in mental health and wellness. Last summer we helped with the cultural wellness directory. So providing space for cultural healers to be known that they are available to, support our community in partnership with Culture and Wellness Center. For me personally, wellness has been part of my journey as a leader in community, not just because of my position of power, but like anytime that I show up in community, and we talk about this in the form that everyone has a role to play in leadership. But if you're not well, you have the potential to actually cause harm to our community. So wellness is a critical factor to bringing your leadership to the fruition, to actually be your best self, right? So we embed wellness in everything that we do. If we aren't well, meaning that we're not healthy, our mind, body, and soul, if we're not capable, meaning we're not building the necessary tools and skills that we can bring our leadership to life, if we're not thorough in the sense of like knowing when to deploy those skills and those capabilities, and then not willing to work with others, you're not well. So we ask people to step back and get well, whatever one of those aspects are with you. Take your time to get well so that you can come in and bring your full self. And as we think about wellness, we can't have leaders in our community that are running on a half a tank or on an empty tank for that matter. So wellness means that you're taking care of yourself, having self-care practices that are regularly done and regularly reviewed so that you know what you need to fill that tank back up. Because when you're your full self, we're a full community of leaders ready to attack the problems, because our health is and our quality of life is constantly under attack. Education, economic wellness, our health, our actual health, and our culture and our safety and all these things that we want to attack. If we're not addressing wellness and all those things, we're not going to be able to solve for those problems. And we're always going to come from a place of deficit, versus a place of abundance. Wellness provides that space to come from an asset-based mindset. So, we embedded in the Leadership Academy, we embedded in our collective impact practices, we embedded within our team ourselves. We want to make sure that we're practicing wellness as a team. But ultimately, we hope that by practicing it within our four walls of our organization and within our programming, that spreads out to the broader community, because we have amazing leaders that are leading wellness efforts, whether it's in mental health or physical health, or making sure that we have great clinics in our community like Northpoint and Minnesota Community Care and Children. So there's so many assets, and we're all well. So, use them and utilize us as a resource so that you can get well and bring your leadership to the forefront, for sure.
Thank you. I want to ask you really quick, and I'll ask all our panelists if you could just give me, in 10 seconds or less, what do you hope is the future of Black Life Amplified, the virtual town hall series? Marcus, I'll start with you.
That we keep going. We keep bringing more leaders to the forefront and sharing their expertise and their wisdom. I think we can always look back and say, wow, I didn't know that we had this many leaders in our community. And I want us to be able to keep saying that through this platform.
Thank you. Reuben, I'll go to you next. What's the future of this town hall?
Continue the voice of our community, the collective intelligence of our community, and as an instrument to reshape it, form us better, prepare us better for all the things that impact our
Ms. Stella, I'll go to you. What do you hope is the future of this town hall?
Well, what I hope is definitely that we keep going and keep getting better. But I really want us to even start reaching to our younger youth, our leaders, our children. It is just amazing to me that we have a generation now that is phenomenal. So I like to see some of our teenagers or even our younger youth that are on Black Life Amplified, hear their voices.
Agreed. James, what's your hope for this hall?
Sure, that we keep growing, like Stella said, and expanding to young people and other people as well. We keep acting, doing actions, committing to action, and we keep committing to getting results. I get embarrassed sometimes when people say, you live in Minnesota and all this stuff's going on, and y'all got those disparities. We're going to change that. In this right here, we're going to change that. So by the time we all retire, some of us sooner rather than others, we won't say who, I'm including that sooner group, that we're going to do some great things for this community, and Black people will be like, man, I want to live in Minnesota because they're doing great stuff there.
Absolutely. Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan made a statement recently saying how it's unsafe for Black people to be in the state of Minnesota. And while I understand and appreciate the sentiment and her continuing to be an ally even within her role, I do think it's important that we shift the narrative to let people know that there is so much more to the state of Minnesota and Blackness than the recent tragedies of Daunte Wright, Philando Castile, George Floyd, and so many others. So my hope for this town hall is that we continue to illuminate that brilliance, that we continue to elevate our production. I'm trying to manifest a production studio, so I can get out of my dining room, and into something bigger, so I can share space with all of you as well as our community members. As we wrap up, I want to give a very special thank you to Batala and Adrienne, who couldn't be here today, but who have been incredibly instrumental in making this town hall possible, as well as to Stan, Candace, Ernest, Ashley, and Sherry, who are always behind the scenes making things happen. Thank you to Uzama, who created our intro and our outro, which you're getting ready to see, as well as to our previous team members who have really helped us get to this point. Harry, Alyssa, Rebecca, LaCora, Sarah, they've moved on to other organizations, but they continue to be a part of our community, and we hold grace and space for them. We want to continue to encourage our community members to get tested for COVID-19, especially if you have been out recently in public assembly. The numbers have started to go up again, so that's incredibly important. And we also just want to affirm to our community and to our audience that your health matters, your narrative matters, and here at Black Life Amplified, we are committed to uplifting both in excellence. This has been another episode of Black Life Amplified. It's the virtual town hall series brought to you by the African American Leadership Forum, Insight News, Gray Matter, Minnesota Spokesman-Recorder, as Minnesota Community Care, and is stood by the Foundation, Northpoint Health and Wellness, Children's Minnesota. We want to invite you back in 2 weeks, Wednesday, May 19th. We're going to reflect on the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd and continue calls for this accountability both locally and across the country. But until then, thank you so much for watching. Thank you, panelists. Please have a great afternoon, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, producers. You can hit our outro now. We out.